We all have our gifts. Some of you are planners. Some of you are social reformers and reframers. Some of you are idealists and investigators, or guardians and protectors. Think for a moment what you bring to this community. Perhaps it's a gift I have not named. If you're stumped, think about how your best friend might describe you and what you contribute to their relationship or the larger community. And if you're so inclined, put your gift in the chat. Me, I am a cheerleader. I know that people look to me to be their enthusiastic supporter. I am told this all the time. And you know what? I actually was a cheerleader in high school. I had the ponytails and the saddle shoes, and I did cartwheels and flips, and I had pom-poms, the whole thing. Our school games were on Friday nights, and on Saturday morning, the football team would gather to watch the recordings of the game and debrief their plays. It was brought to my attention that they had to watch with the sound off because all you could hear on that recording was my voice bellowing the cheers. You're welcome. I was that loud. Some say I am still that loud. I like to think only metaphorically. This has not been a good season for cheerleaders. It's overwhelming out there. The stakes are high. The pressure is on. And I know that you need us. A pandemic is not a breeding ground for joy. Liminal space is exhausting for everyone, including those of us who are known for our high energy. I almost called this sermon the cheerleader's guide to these pandemics. This cheerleader's guide to these pandemics. Yes. I say pandemics plural because aside from COVID-19, racialized brutality is bringing us all down. Climate change is rising the temperature literally and figuratively. This high anxiety and despair is a real bummer for joy. So what would my guide say if I was actually writing a guide? Number one, first, get clear on the essentials and then focus only on the essentials. A congregation near me in the Puget Sound, which was the COVID-19 epicenter on the West Coast, they publicly named that their essential was relationship. And if it didn't have to do with relationship, it was put on hold until further notice. Relationship was their litmus test. Relationship within the congregation. Everyone got a call from their board or the pastoral care team immediately to check on their safety. Relationship within their local town with their mission partners. How would they show up together for the community's most vulnerable? Relationship with area Unitarian Universalist congregations. How could we pool resources so all boats would rise? So I turn and ask you now, what are your essentials? Maybe even who are your essentials? And I give you permission to focus on those and only those until further notice. Number two, in my survival guide, would be to spend copious amounts of time napping, meditating, and staring off into space, whatever it takes to refuel. Now, I used to be a straight A student with a constant stomachache and very short fingernails because I regularly bit them off. As an adult, my weekly reports to my supervisors were packed with measurable outcomes until one supervisor changed my life and disrupted this manic drive. She was horrified by this A+ work report. Don't ever do that again, she said. Your schedule is so packed with busyness. When are you ever able to do ministry? When do you rest and recover to be ready for when a congregational leader calls you and really needs you? And you're so busy, how would they be able to get a hold of you anyway? And if you keep this up, you'll be burned out and useless. She was so wise. So I started putting into my schedule lots of rest and meditation and debriefing and just time to wait for people who needed me. I think that's when my ministry began. The third suggestion in my guide for these pandemic times would be to lower expectations. That's good advice, even when we're not stressed out in a pandemic. And I know some of you are going, why is she talking about the pandemic? We've got these vaccines, and isn't the pandemic over? Dear ones, no. So, lowering expectations. Lowering expectations invites a new understanding of success and raises the probability of realization. Lowering expectations lowers your blood pressure and raises contentment. I highly recommend it. That boss that I told you about earlier, she also taught me this business about lowering expectations. I used to get such a fuss about congregational leaders who wouldn't take my advice because surely I knew best. Or I'd be disappointed by higher ups not acting like I thought that they should be acting. Do you ever feel this way? Or is it just me? My boss saw me continually beating my head against the wall, and she finally intervened. She said, people are gonna people, and people are messy. I think that belongs like on a cross-stitch pillow. People are gonna people, and people are messy. Lower your expectations, and you will be much happier. Lo and behold, she was right. I lowered my expectations, and I can just feel that joy starting to creep back in. This practice of lowering expectations actually has a religious word with it. Grace. Grace means unmerited mercy. We all deserve it. You, me, the person in the box, in the screen next to you, on Zoom, we all deserve grace. That lowered expectation. 4, which is related to 3, and I learned this in my 12-step program. Let go and let God. And by God, I mean the God of your understanding. You know those situations that make you just shake your head and think, oh, here we go again. When you're with somebody and it's like the same old conflict, the same old thing that just drains your energy. I stop, I breathe, and then I discern, is this really my work, the other person's work, or God's work? This often happens in a persistent conflict I have with someone. I ask myself if the conflict is really all that important in the greater scheme of things, or if my big feelings are even about the actual conflict or about something else. And I either address what's really at the core, or I disengage it and hand it over to God. I let it go. I'm so protective of my time and energy now. I need to get back to my essentials. The 5th in my guide is tending to my grief. And that's a hard one. We Unitarian Universalists are so optimistic, and I'm not sure that that served us well in the long run. We have very few rituals for grief or lamentation, very few hymns. Although I just heard of a congregation that since COVID-19 regularly get together online and howl. I love that idea. They get mad together and they grieve together and they howl. People, we were grieving before COVID-19. Now there's so much grief. Check yourself when you're angry. See if you're angry about something, what that anger is about, because in ministry school, we're taught that anger is usually unmanaged, unrealized grief. And grief can be so uncomfortable. Depression can also be unmetabolized grief. And this may be counterintuitive, but when we tend to our grief, we make space for joy. Number 6, and this is the last one. Practice joy as a spiritual discipline. Notice I didn't say do joy, just be joy. Practice joy as a spiritual discipline. Oh, and I recommend this book. There's this book that I have been just eating up. It's so good. All the Joy You Can Stand, 101 Power Principles for Making Joy Real in Your Life by Debrena Jackson Gandy. All the Joy You Can Stand. Oh, love it. Love it. Those closest to me would probably say that I am an innately joyful person. That's why Reverend Duffy, when he knew that your theme for December was joy and thought, who can I get to guest preach? He called me up right away. I'm a pretty joyful person. And I also struggle with depression. I have a medical condition that causes me chronic pain, and pain can cause you depression. But joy and depression are not mutually exclusive. There are days when I feel dry and despondent. It's incredibly uncomfortable. Some days I panic and I wonder if I'm ever going to feel like myself again. Does that happen to you? Well, on one of the days when I felt like myself, when I felt joyful, I wrote a love letter to myself to read on those hard days. So I wrote a love letter to myself, my future self, on a bad day. Here's what it says. I'm going to read it to myself, and maybe you need to hear it too. So this is for you too. Dear Tandi, because you are reading this, I know you are suffering and wondering if your energy will ever come back. I remember it's a horrible place to be. You wonder if you are a burden. You torture yourself with notions that you can't carry your load. Honey, put that load down. Just set it right where you are standing and go rest. Deep rest. If you've forgotten what brings you back, I've made a list of 5 things to start with, and they may inspire more. So when you're writing your letter, put down the things that bring you back. Okay, ready? For me, 1, enjoy a beverage and a book of poetry on the porch swing. Choose love poetry. Receive the passionate verses as if the author was channeling God's adoration for you. 2, water aerobics, but not to build that muscle and burn those calories, rather to just float and feel the water on your skin, to check in with your class buddies who care about you and who also know struggle. 3, bake bread, knead it, whisper to it as it rises, prayers of encouragement, and then turn those words onto yourself. Bake the bread, and then gobble up those prayers. Use lots of butter as if it's an as if it's an instrument of sacrament. 4, get lost in a movie, surrender to the storyteller until its spell passes. Let your imagination run with the story just for the sheer pleasure. And 5, sleep. Really, you have permission. I go on to tell myself, I know it's counterintuitive, but what I know is when you stop and care for yourself, your energy comes back. In fact, the more you submit and let go, the deeper your well goes and is filled again. There is no shortage of God's love for you. You just have to stop and receive it. Your sweet shell, your body, simply can't keep up with your spirit and your yearning for the world. It's not your fault. It just is. But it can also be your blessing. When you feel that deep drain, that foggy exhaustion, reframe it as God's call for you to stop and be with her for a while. The energy that you love will come back. You will feel like the self you've grown attached to, really. But for now, just rest. Love yourself. I hope that you write a letter like that to yourself. Do that soon. And if you need to borrow my letter for yourself, that's fine. Here are the things to keep in mind as we all find our way out of this marathon of disorientation. 1, pay attention to the essentials. 2, rest and refuel. 3, lower expectations. 4, let go and let God. 5, tend to your grief. And 6, practice joy. Here's the thing. As a cheerleader, I don't care if my team was winning or losing. It didn't change how I cheered. I was thrilled to watch my classmates trying their best all together, creating a team that was larger than one individual. There have been times that watching leaders and congregations come together creatively during these hard times is just like that. And my dear siblings in faith in Bozeman, it is an honor to be your cheerleader.